Despite the Untouchables' round-the-clock efforts to find a chink in Waxy Gordon's armor, he continued.
Before we dive into the blood-stained streets of Chicago, I want to know who I'm talking to today. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching this from? It's fascinating how these stories of power and betrayal reach every corner of the world. You think you know the story of the men who couldn't be bought? You've seen the suits, the fedoras, and the legendary standoffs. But what if I told you that everything you saw on screen was a carefully constructed lie designed to distract you from a much darker reality? There are details hidden in the frames of the classics, subtle choices made in the shadows of the set that change the entire meaning of the justice we think we understand. Today, we're peeling back the curtain. We're going beyond the silver screen to reveal the forbidden details of the Untouchables that were never meant to be analyzed. Pay close attention, because once you see the pattern, there is no going back. Let's start with something most people overlook: the color of power. In the world of 1920 Chicago, visual storytelling wasn't just about looking sharp. It was about psychological warfare. Look at the way the light hits the characters. Notice how the heroes are often shrouded in more darkness than the villains. This wasn't an accident. The director wanted to whisper a secret to you, that to catch a monster, you have to become something even more terrifying. There's a specific scene where the lead investigator stands near a window, and the shadow of the frame creates a literal cage on his face. He wasn't just hunting a criminal, he was already a prisoner of his own obsession. But here is where it gets interesting and a bit disturbing. We're told these men were untouchable because they were incorruptible, but the real-life files tell a different story. In the cinematic version, they are polished icons of morality. However, if you look closely at the background characters, the extras, the men in the back of the station, you see the real face of the era. Many of those background actors were styled to look like actual figures from the internal investigations of the time. It was a silent nod to the fact that the system was rotting from the inside out. And then there's the matter of the big boss. The portrayal of the Kingpin wasn't just about acting, it was about the energy of a predator. Did you ever notice how he is almost always eating or surrounded by luxury while discussing life and death? This is a classic manipulation tactic. It's meant to dehumanize the victims. To him, a human life had the same value as a steak on a plate. But there's one detail in his final scene, a look in his eyes that wasn't in the script. It was a moment of genuine realization that the empire wasn't falling because of the law, but because he had finally run out of people to betray. Now let's talk about the cost. Every victory in this narrative comes with a heavy price tag. You see the shootout, you see the glory, but nobody tells you about the psychological toll. There is a hidden detail in the way the youngest member of the team handles his weapon. At the start, he's hesitant. His hands shake. By the end, he's a machine. The film shows this as growth, but if you look at it through a modern lens, it's the documentation of a soul eroding. They didn't just win, they lost the very thing they were trying to protect, their humanity. But wait, because this is just the surface. We haven't even touched the most controversial part of the production yet. There's a sequence involving a child that everyone remembers. The tension, the slow motion, the stakes. But what almost nobody knows is the near miss that happened during filming. A mistake that almost ended the production and changed the way safety was handled on sets forever. It was a moment where the line between movie violence and real-world tragedy almost vanished. You see, the truth about these Untouchables isn't found in their badges. It's found in the secrets they kept from their own families. The real story involves letters that were never sent and deals that were made in the dead of night just to keep the operation afloat. We like to believe in black and white, in good and evil, but in the shadows of this story, everything is a deep blood-red shade of gray. And speaking of shadows, there is a figure that appears in 3 different scenes, always in the background, always wearing the same gray coat. He isn't a main character. He isn't even credited as a major extra. But his presence is a direct reference to a real-life ghost of the Chicago underworld. someone who saw everything and said nothing. Identifying him changes the context of every major plot point in the movie. It suggests that the Untouchables were being watched by the very people they thought they were outsmarting. Stay with me, because we are about to move into the tactical errors that even the experts missed. There's a moment in the second act where a single decision by the lead character leads to a catastrophic chain reaction. Most viewers think it was just bad luck. I'm going to show you why it was a calculated move by a traitor within the inner circle. A detail so subtle that it took investigators decades to piece it together. But that's not even the most shocking part. What comes next is the revelation that the big win at the end might not have been a win at all. The air in Chicago wasn't just thick with smoke back then, it was thick with the scent of compromise. Most people watch these classic scenes and see a battle between the law and the lawless. But if you look at the frame rates and the way the camera lingers on certain objects, you'll realize the director was trying to warn us about something else, something much more prohibited. Let's talk about the bridge scene. On the surface, it's a tactical operation. But if you analyze the dialogue, there's a phrase used about the Chicago way. This wasn't just a cool movie line. In the original drafts of the narrative, that phrase carried a much darker weight. It was a reference to a real-life pact made between the authorities and the syndicates, a pact that stated that as long as the violence stayed in the alleys, the books would stay closed. When the characters in the movie break this rule, they aren't just fighting crime, they are breaking a business contract. That's why the retaliation is so brutal. It wasn't about justice. It was about a breach of ethics among thieves. Presta atenção nisso agora. Look at the hands of the characters. In almost every scene involving the Untouchables, their hands are either covered in gloves or stained with something ink, oil, or eventually something worse. This is a visual metaphor for the loss of innocence. You start the movie seeing white collars and clean badges. By the middle, the hero is hiding his hands in his pockets. Why? Because the deeper he goes into the underworld, the more he realizes that you can't touch filth without getting dirty yourself. Now let's look at the hidden numbers. In the background of the accountant's office, the man they are trying to protect, there are ledgers visible on the desks. If you freeze the frame and look at the figures, they aren't just random scribbles. The production team used real financial data from the era's investigations. Those numbers tell a story of a city that was essentially a corporation owned by a single man. The prohibited detail here is that the movie subtly shows that even the good guys were being paid through accounts that ultimately linked back to the same source. It's a loop, a cycle of money that no one, not even the most honest man, could fully escape. There is a moment of transformation that almost everyone misses. It happens in a quiet room, away from the gunfire. Our protagonist sits down and looks at a photo of his family. In that specific shot, the lighting shifts from a warm yellow to a cold, clinical blue. This is the exact moment he stops being a father and becomes a hunter. He realizes that to protect his family, he has to become the very thing that keeps him awake at night. This isn't a heroic transformation. It's a tragedy. He's trading his soul for a conviction. And what about the traitor? Every great story has a leak, but the one in this narrative isn't who you think it is. Look at the way the information travels. There's a scene where a certain character accidentally leaves a door unlocked. Most people think it was a mistake or a sign of being overwhelmed. But if you track that character's movements in the previous scenes, you'll see him interacting with a ghost figure in the background, the man in the gray coat I mentioned before. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was a whisper in a hallway. It was a choice made because someone's debt was called in. Let's get even more specific. There's a study of the table scene. You know, the one with the baseball bat. It's one of the most aggressive scenes in cinema history. But here's what nobody told you. The reaction of the men sitting around that table wasn't entirely scripted. The actor playing the boss was told to be unpredictable. The fear you see on the faces of the other actors? That's 10% acting and 90% genuine tension. They didn't know exactly when or how the outburst would happen. This level of intensity was designed to show the audience that under a dictatorship no one is safe, not even the inner circle. It's a lesson in the fragility of power. But here is the detail that truly changes everything. There is a forbidden object that appears in the villain's office, a small ornate box. It seems like a simple piece of decor. However, historians of the era recognize it as a symbol of the High Commission. Its presence suggests that the villain wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just a middle manager. The real power was someone we never see on screen, someone who was likely funding both sides of the war. Think about that for a second. The Untouchables were risking their lives to take down a man who was ultimately replaceable. The system allowed them to win because it needed a cleansing to let a new, more discreet group take over. It's a disturbing thought. What if the heroes were just the cleaning crew for a different kind of monster? We are moving into the final act now, where the masks finally fall off. And the climax of this story involves a revelation so aggressive that it was almost cut from the final version. It involves the last stand and a discovery made in a pocket that was never supposed to be searched. But before we get to that, you need to understand the secret behind the opera scene. It's not about the music, it's about a signal that was sent in plain sight. The music of the opera wasn't just there to provide a dramatic backdrop, it was a shroud. While the tragedy was unfolding on stage, an even darker one was being orchestrated in the private boxes. Look closely at the hands of the audience members during the close-ups. There is a specific gesture, a touch of the lapel that happens 3 times. This wasn't a fashion choice. It was a historical all-clear signal used by the outfits of that era. The movie is telling you that even in a temple of art and culture, the Untouchables were surrounded. They were walking into a trap that had been set long before the first violin played. Now, let's get into the climax of truth. We've all seen the rooftop scene, the confrontation, the finality of it. But did you notice the dialogue? There is a moment where the villain laughs, not out of madness, but out of pity. He says something about the next guy. This is the most revelatory part of the entire narrative. He wasn't afraid of dying or going to prison. He was laughing because he knew the vacancy he was leaving would be filled by someone much worse, someone who learned from his mistakes. The forbidden detail here is the realization that the justice our heroes fought for was a temporary band-aid on a terminal wound. Presta atenção nisso agora. The evidence. Throughout the story, we are led to believe that a simple ledger, a book of numbers, is the key to everything. But there is a frame lasting less than a second, where the lead investigator flips through the pages. If you look at the names listed in the margins, they aren't just criminals. They are judges, senators, and names that mirror the high society families of the time. This is why the case was so dangerous. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that the entire social structure was built on a foundation of prohibited deals. To win the case, the heroes had to agree to lose certain pages. They had to protect the big names to get the small win. And that brings us to the closing reality. The end of the film feels like a victory. The sun comes out, the streets are cleaner, and our hero walks away. But look at his eyes. That isn't the look of a man who saved a city. It's the look of a man who knows he has been used. He didn't break the cycle, he just changed the color of the ink. The final secret is that the lead character leaves the force shortly after. Not because he was tired, but because he couldn't live with the hidden cost of the deals he had to make in the shadows. If you ignore these details, you stay stuck in the cycle of believing the fairy tale. You stay blind to how the world really works. The Untouchables weren't icons. They were warnings. They were a testament to the fact that in a world of absolute corruption, being untouchable means you are eventually left with nothing to hold on to. You can choose to see the movie as a classic hero story, or you can see it for what it truly is, a manual on how power is transferred, how truth is negotiated, and how justice is often just a brand name for a different kind of control. The question is, now that you've seen the shadows, which version will you choose to believe? Don't just watch, analyze, because the most disturbing truths are always hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to stop looking at the light and start staring into the dark. If you're not careful, you'll miss the next ghost standing in the background of your own life. Stay sharp. Let's go deeper into the architecture of chaos.
There is a specific reason why the action in this story feels so visceral, so uncomfortably real. It's the geometry of the scenes. Look at the railway station sequence again. Everyone talks about the baby carriage, but pay attention to the pillars. The way the characters move between them isn't random. It's a chess match. Each pillar represents a safe zone that is slowly being eroded. The prohibited detail here is that the production designers built that set to be a literal maze where the exits were intentionally hidden from the actor's eyeline during the first few takes. They wanted that genuine look of panic. They wanted the Untouchables to look like they were drowning in a sea of marble and lead. Now let's talk about the tools of the trade. The weapons used in this narrative weren't just props. There's a hidden detail in the Thompson submachine guns. If you listen closely, and I mean really listen with high-quality audio, the sound of the gunfire changes depending on who is pulling the trigger. The good guys' weapons have a sharper, more synchronized mechanical sound. The bad guys' weapons sound chaotic, heavier, more erratic. This was a subconscious audio cue designed to make you feel like the law was a precise machine, while the underworld was a spreading infection. It's a subtle form of psychological conditioning that keeps you on the edge of your seat without you knowing why. Presta atenção nisso agora, the funeral scene. This is where the emotional weight of the cost of war really hits. But look at the flowers. This is a detail almost no one catches. The types of floral arrangements shown were historically accurate for gangland burials of the 1920s. Certain flowers meant certain messages. A specific wreath shown in the background of a rival's funeral actually signaled betrayal from within. The movie is literally telling you who the next victim will be 5 scenes before it happens, just through the background decor. It's a forbidden language of the underworld, hidden in plain sight. And what about the whiskey? The very thing they were fighting against. There is a scene in a warehouse where they bust open the crates. If you look at the labels on the bottles, they aren't fake brands. They are the names of real distilleries that were actually operating under the radar during Prohibition. The disturbing part? Some of those distilleries were owned by the same politicians who were publicly congratulating the Untouchables on their success. The movie is winking at the audience, showing that the poison they were fighting was being manufactured by the hands that shook theirs in the light of day. Let's move to the tactical mistakes. There is a moment during the border raid, the one in the snow. Look at the shadows on the ground. The sun is in the wrong place for the time of day the characters claim it is. This wasn't a filming error. It was a choice to create a dreamlike, almost purgatory-fed atmosphere. They wanted the audience to feel like the Untouchables had stepped out of the real world and into a place where the rules of man and nature no longer applied. It's the colder-than-hell principle. To capture the devil, you have to go to a place where even the sun feels fake. Now look at the body language of the lead's wife. She is barely in the movie, right? Wrong. Her presence is the invisible anchor. There is a scene where she is packing a suitcase. Look at how she handles the clothes. She isn't just packing, she is cleansing. She represents the life the hero can no longer have. The prohibited detail here is that in the original script, she had a dialogue that was deleted because it was too revealing. She was supposed to tell him that she knew he was becoming the man he was hunting. By removing the words and keeping only her silent, mournful stares, the director made the realization even more aggressive for the viewer. You feel the loss more because it's never spoken. We also need to address the stunt that almost went wrong. During the high-speed chase, there is a moment where a car flips. If you look at the reaction of the Untouchable in the passenger seat, he's not acting. The car flipped closer to the camera than intended, nearly crushing the crew. They kept the footage because that look of near-death adrenaline couldn't be faked. It adds a layer of lethal reality to the film that modern CGI just can't replicate. It reminds us that the stakes weren't just high for the characters, they were high for the people telling the story. But here is the climax of the climax. Before we reach the final resolution, there is a secret meeting shown in a silhouette. We never see the faces, but if you compare the heights and the walking patterns of those silhouettes to the main cast, you realize that one of the shadow figures is actually one of the heroes. This is the ultimate forbidden truth. To get the final evidence needed to win, A deal was struck in that dark room that compromised everything the Untouchables stood for. They didn't win by being untouchable. They won by finally allowing themselves to be touched by the darkness. This leads us to the final question of the narrative. When the hero is asked what he'll do now that prohibition is over, he says he'll have a drink. It sounds like a joke, but after everything we've just uncovered, the betrayal, the ghosts in the background, the politicians on the ledgers, that drink isn't a celebration, it's a surrender. He's finally joining the world he spent years trying to destroy. The Untouchables didn't change Chicago. Chicago changed them. And if you've been paying attention to these details, you realize that the same thing happens every day in the world of power. You don't beat the system. You either die fighting it, or you live long enough to become the one who signs the ledgers. Stay with me for the final wrap-up, because I have one last Easter egg that connects this 1920s story to a modern-day conspiracy that is still active today. So here we are at the end of the road. We've looked into the shadows, we've analyzed the hidden frames, and we've uncovered the deals made in the dark. But there is one last forbidden detail that ties everything together. Remember the ghost in the gray coat I mentioned at the beginning? If you watch the very last scene, as the camera pulls away from the city, there is a figure standing on a distant corner. It's him. He's still there. The Untouchables are gone. The villains are in the ground or behind bars, but the observer, the representation of the true silent power remains. This is the ultimate noir ending. It's the realization that while we focus on the loud battles between good and evil, the real architects of our world never even raise their voices. This story isn't just about the 1920s. It's about the cycle of power that repeats in every generation. We see it in the news, we see it in our systems, and we see it in the choices we make when we think no one is watching. The Untouchables taught us that integrity has a price, and sometimes that price is everything you hold dear. If you've made it this far, you're not just a casual viewer anymore. You're someone who looks for the truth beneath the surface. And that's a dangerous way to live, but it's the only way to be truly free. Don't let the cinematic version of reality blind you to the prohibited truths happening in the background of your own life. If you ignore these warnings, you stay trapped in the cycle. But if you apply this level of scrutiny to everything you see, you become the one person the system can't control. You become in your own way, untouchable. Thank you for walking through the shadows with me today. If this deep dive changed the way you see the Chicago way, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more secrets to uncover, more vaults to break open, and more lies to dismantle. And remember, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the gun. It's the one who knows exactly how the room was built. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next revelation.